Welcome to Puck Talk CS. Matthew Mugno, Steven Murno here to talk all things New York Rangers. We got the Frozen Four this upcoming weekend, probably the best hockey outside of the Olympics we'll see this year. But for right now, we want to talk about that massive victory the Rangers had over the Washington Capitals just a few nights back on Easter Sunday. And we'll talk about some of the depth going on with the organization, some of the things we're impressed by, the Devils and Islanders big moves in their front office head coach position. We want to talk about Adam Fox specifically, the youth movement. Is it a lucky run or not? And also, Steve-O, something you wanted to talk about is experience overall with everything that's gone on this year with the Rangers and comparing that with some of the Metro rivals that are on the bubble for the playoffs. So, Steve, a great day to talk hockey, and it's great to see you, man.
Yeah, as always, great to see you. And that's a loaded docket. I'm pumped as ever. So let's do it. Let's talk some puck. Final week here.
I want to bring up first and foremost the schedule, right? This is the wins they've had recently, a really great stretch for the young guys that have been called up. They're playing with house money, right? Like, let's be for real. Stats look pretty on paper, but this team did not win when it mattered. Okay. But now they are winning, and it's still important that they can carry this experience into next year. It's important for a number of reasons. Without listing all of them out, Steve, the first thing you said is, I want this season to be over. And that's a different position than where I sit. So I want to hear your thoughts on why you're not too happy that the team is now winning at the clip they are.
Yeah. Well, I am happy that the team is winning. I think that you look at the way some other teams' seasons are ending, and you look at the way that we're playing. I guess there's the saying, better late than never. But I mean, it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. I'm happy that we are playing well. But when you look at it overall, this year is still a major disappointment. And it is incredibly frustrating that coming down at the stretch, you look at our the last 5 games that we've had, and we've led at least by 3 goals in like the last 3 games that we've had. And you contrast that to the first 5 games of the season where we managed a combined total of 2 goals and we've shut out what 3 or 4 times, and it looks like that black cloud has finally seemed to move on, and that's good. Look, it's been replaced by sunshine, blue skies. This is a loose team that's playing free. They're having fun, they're piling up wins. But this year is still a disappointment, and I I said I want it to end because there's just there's no reason for the season to continue. But I'll walk that statement back because these kids are playing like they belong in the NHL, and these are still valuable games. There's still valuable takeaways to take away for next season. And I think we've been eliminated for the playoffs for a long time right now. And the thing to admit about that is it's easy to win when there's no pressure, when you have nothing to
Mhm.
play for, and I think you looked at when the pressure was on early in the season and you want to have wins like you had against the Red Wings and the Capitals. You want to have those wins in November and December and January, and they were non-existent. We struggled against bad teams this year early on, and I think there's still some of that's still leaving residue in my mind. And, overall the year is still a disappointment, but there are still key takeaways. So I want to hear your thought process on this matter.
Yeah, I think what's important to note is that New Jersey is still actually in the mix. If they went on a miracle run, they can get into the playoffs. The Rangers beat them. That was the Shesterkin fight night. Then you play Montreal. There's one gaff. I know that did numbers on our YouTube channel here of JT Miller's commentary about the face-off with Suzuki, with the official. I think that was Chris Kelly, and then the Cole Caulfield goal that sealed that game. They played with resiliency though. They played with the puck in zone, had their chances with an empty net against the top. Everyone's talking about how Montreal is an emerging team, right? That's what Mike Sullivan said in the post game. Montreal to me is a top 5 team in the league because they are. They've crossed the 100-point plateau, and you were one goal away from tying the contest late. You played Detroit, who had to win. They've missed the playoffs for a decade. You and I have talked about the Iser plan a few times off air, but the fact that they had to win that game and Perot scores a hat trick, that's a team that came into MSG and had to win. Oh, let's walk that now to Sunday. Washington had to win. The Rangers pretty much eliminated the Washington Capitals from the postseason, barring any changes to what we've seen in the standings, which we'll pull up in a moment. But I think what's important to note here is that the Rangers don't have anything to play for. So internally, they don't have that pressure, but they did beat teams that had to win. And I think that's important to note as we go into the game against Buffalo tomorrow and on national and against Dallas on Saturday, because those are teams that have clinched playoff spots, but I think there are also teams that don't have the hunger Detroit, Washington, Montreal have, but they're teams that are still continuing to play really well. If you watch that Buffalo Tampa game last night, they haven't let their foot off the gas. So to me, Steve, I think what's important to note about these victories is that they're playing against hungry competition and they're playing against some teams that are in the top of the league.
Yeah. Can you pull up the not the standings? Can you pull up that schedule again? I got one
Yeah,
more
yeah, of course.
question on that note. So I want to ask you,
Mhm.
we got Buffalo coming up next. They're going to be making the playoffs for the first time in 15 years. But they will be
That
coming into
rocks.
the Garden desperately needing a win because, they're still battling Tampa. They're still battling Montreal for first place in the Atlantic. A
Mhm.
weird contrast, to the first game of the season when Buffalo opened their season, with a 4-0 loss to us at home. Figure out where things have come now. But I want to ask you, because I think this is the perfect spot to give Jonathan Quick his final NHL start. Assuming that he retires at the end of the year. So I want to ask you in the schedule, which one of these games would you line Quick up for his final start? I think Buffalo, at home, last home game. I think that's probably the best chance to give him his last start.
If you want me to be honest, as always, I think we've already seen Jonathan Quick start his last game for the
Wow.
Rangers and in his NHL career. Yeah. I think for the fan base, your last home game is against a playoff lock, a team that's coming in on fire. They've been good all year, like you said. Um, After a slower start, Buffalo is a team. I think you have to start Igor Shesterkin at home. I think if I feel like Quick, do you want to start him in his last career game on the road in what's the end of what feels like a pretty meaningless season? It felt like I already felt like the subtext on his last start was that it was his last game. But Steve, since you raised the question, and this is like based on no real tangible information, where would you start him? You would start him at home?
Yeah, I would start him home at Buffalo. I agree with the point you just made. I wouldn't, there's no reason to jog him out on the road and in a meaningless game, especially in a Florida. Maybe in Florida, if you were going to start him on the road in any one of those three games, you'd have to think, you're not gonna start him against Dallas because the Dallas they're still locked into a first round playoff matchup against the Wild. But they're still battling for home ice, in that opening
Mhm.
round. So they still have something to play for. They're going to come out of home. You figure that's not the best opportunity to put them in. Probably that Florida game on the road, they've got nothing to play for at this point. If you want to give them a nice little send off and give them the best chance of winning, you probably want to do it there. But I would probably say Sabres another good opportunity. I agree with you. I don't think I would out of those four games, I would probably say Buffalo. Would probably be my game that I would start him, but I don't think I agree with you. I don't think they would start him, against the Buffalo Sabres team again. That again, they desperately need a win. So I would probably look to there, but now's probably a good time. Let's look at the standings. You got those pulled up?
Yeah, let me pull that up real quick. I didn't screenshot it, so I'll be sharing my screen here. Um, in the meantime, I mean, standings talk. Like I said, the fact of Montreal, you took your one goal away from Montreal defeating Montreal or tying them and then going to overtime. I should state is a pretty good sign, I think, for a team that really at the beginning of the month, the Rangers went on a 5-6 game losing streak. So the fact they've kind of turned that mojo around, it's felt like a little bit of a different team in the last 2 weeks here against some stiff copy. And here we go. Can I see? Okay. So that's the standings. Is that zoomed in enough? Let me zoom in a little bit more. How's that looking? Good?
Perfect.
All right.
Yeah.
So
Buffalo is
Um,
really a top dog in the league.
yeah, yep.
Look at them all sitting up there
And
high.
all right, so what do you want to look at here, Steve?
Let's go to us first before we talk a little. We look at everybody else, see what's going
Gotcha.
on.
Oh, gotta scroll down a little bit.
The reason I say, yes, I want the season to continue and us to keep winning. Yes, I'm not that stupid. But the reason I sit there and say, you know what, I want the season to be over is because we all know this. This team, I think, in terms of us, we desperately need a top talent. It was what, a week and a half ago we sat there, UBS, and we watched Schaefer and we watched Bedard and we just see the raw talent. Just seeing their presence on ice, the speed, the playmaking ability. That's exactly what we need. And I think if we could get, I'm not saying the number one pick, I'm saying top 30. If we get still some brand new young talent, pair that with one or two mid, free agency dogs, we're a team that can compete. We are 100% a team that can compete, and you look at it, yes, we're right in the mix. You see Seattle right there. You see Calgary, you see Chicago. Well, Chicago's probably going to finish behind us.
Hmm.
I had hope that Calgary was going to jump us, but now, you sit here and you win another 1-2 games. We're sitting here talking, you know what? We play a game against Florida. We beat them. We're going to jump them. We're going to jump Seattle. You could, Toronto's not out of the conversation. I don't know how many games they're going to win for the rest of the year. So, it's only like you're hurting your stock, but, with the number one pick, anything is possible. You look at what the Islanders were able to do. So, you want to sit here and you want to help your position, but at the same time, I've said this like a month ago before we actually started winning, on this little bit of a run here. But you want to be able to win games. That is very meaningful to the confidence of these players that are going to be on the team next year. So it's split,
Hmm.
it's 50-50, So if you had to ask me, do I want to lose out or do I want to win out? Honestly, I'd probably say I'd want to win out. But again, you understand where I'm coming from. It's so frustrating that now you got nothing to play for, and now you want to start winning games, and you're 5-1 in the last 6 games, and you're winning, 5 games in a row at home. It's frustrating to the same team that when it mattered, got shut out like 6 times in the first month and a half. That's why I want the season to be over. It's so frustrating. But you got to be happy. At least, this team, got their moment, right?
Yeah, this feels like I just washed my hands and now I'm holding a delicate vase in my hand. Like, I think what's important with this is that like you said, you can manage, uh, or make moves as the front office to ensure that your chances of winning might be slighted. And I think this is extremely delicate for the New York Rangers because if you're the Chicago Blackhawks, okay, maybe a free agent that we signed doesn't like that, even though I'm sure they're on board with the way their rebuild is going, right? They've gone the long term, slow burn style. The Rangers use the term retool. We don't know entirely what that means, but we do know that uh, you want to retain some of these players. And at least from, again, I used the word subtext before, reading between the lines, it seems like a guy like Mika Zibanejad saying, and we're going to get to Adam Fox in a moment, but he's a player that you're hoping stays. And if you're hoping these players stay, you don't want to ruin what's been going on right now, right? Like you don't want to take those guys out of the lineup because I know we already talked about how JT Miller's body language can be an issue. And we know that he plays with fire, and sometimes that furnace can burn the interior and can burn in the locker room. Um, Again, I'm someone who believes that can be used as a good thing, and I don't think it's been something that's been too destructive. At least, listen, I don't have the quote on deck, but Quinn Hughes mentioned last week that he believed the JT Miller trade out of Vancouver is what led to the demise of that Canucks team and that group. So I think that speaks volumes. Okay. Let's not take that with a grain of salt. And with that said, I evidence that to state I don't think it's a good idea to take JT Miller out of the lineup now because what does that mean? How does Miller react? How does Mika Zibanejad react if he sat the last 2 games? Listen, most of the time that's what we see. And for the most part, Ranger fans have not had to endure that too many years. I mean, 2018, 2019, and 20. okay, maybe 21, they played Kincaid the last game of the season, and they played some young guys like Kravtsov and some guys that earned an opportunity at the end of the year. But really, the Rangers, what I can count on my hands, 5 times we've seen the organization not play starters on purpose or play youth guys on purpose in the final game of the year. Um, and I think this time around, I should say the opposite. We usually see that because they're in a playoff spot. Now we're seeing guys that, like last year, Chris Kreider, Mika Zibanejad, they played in the final game of the year. Now maybe that was because they knew Kreider was probably going to be traded. I don't know. But at the end of the day, I'm stating that with the final stretch coming up, you want to balance playing veteran guys and keeping them involved and keeping them happy and playing the young guys. The thing that has moved this team along is that Sikora, Malash, um, Laba, Cooley, Lafreniere, Perot, Fortescue, even Garand for the 2 games he played, they've been the reason that this team is winning games, actually, right? Because what we didn't have all season was those guys contributing, having depth contribute. Outside of a splash from Taylor Radish and a stretch from maybe a Johnny Brodzinski, but nothing too long or nothing that endured success. So with that said, Steve, I do think it's a delicate balance because you mentioned the standings. This is where the Rangers are picking right now. They have the 4th overall pick before the draft lottery, which is on May 5th. And they also have, I believe that's 9 picks through the first 3 rounds. So the fact they have 2 firsts, a second, and then a plethora of thirds is actually a really good thing. But I like what you said. To me, it doesn't change my opinion that they need a top end talent. Like this team, this organization still needs a top end talent. I think what I'm stating is it's hard to justify this organization right now sitting the guys you need to make happy, or at least you want to be part of the solution, or at least the organization has inferenced that they want to be a part of the solution. Zibanejad, Fox, Miller, potentially Trocheck, or you don't want to sit the guys that are now having a great experience because that could ruin Sikora's development. Like you don't want to take him out of the lineup. So I think the Rangers are in an uncomfortable situation because of all those things I just stated.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I think when we sat here 2 weeks ago on the pod and we were like, shut JT down, shut Mika down for the last 2 games of the year. I'm going to completely flip on that because that was before we went 5-1 in the last 6 games. If you told me we were going to go 5-1, in the last, and win 6 out of 7 in the final homestand at the Garden, I'm saying, play them. I think you made great points because a lot of our veteran players, especially Mika, Fox, Vinny and Miller, these guys have had such a huge or they are the biggest reason why these kids, are finishing the year strong. They are causing these opportunities. And I want to talk about Adam Fox, because he is
Let's talk Foxy.
let's talk about him because I said this on the last episode, kind of set the table there for this. But undoubtedly, he's one of the reasons why I think we struggled this year when he was missing, that good chunk of time for injury, and if he plays the last 4 games of the year, he will finish at, I think it will be, he's not going to hit the 60 game mark. I think it's going to be like 55 or 56, which I think will be, either a tie or a career low for him. I know that 2020 year is currently stands as his career low. But however, I'm not changing my position on this. When he is healthy on the ice, I think he's been able to put together, excellent production for us, especially on the offensive side. He is QB1 on this team offensively. And again, you take Adam Fox off this team the last 2 weeks, I guarantee you a lot of these kids don't have their moment, and aren't playing as well as they are. And not to mention, I'll pull it up in a second. I want to see how many games he's played and how many points he has. But I think he's trending at a point per game mark at, in the game
Close, Steve.
that he's played. I'm willing to bet that he's been that, because it certainly feels like watching him. He is so important. He is an anchor to the team. You talk about, anchor beings, on this team. Adam Fox is certainly, I think if he played a full season, I'm curious to see if you agree with me on this. If he played a full healthy year this year, it's not crazy to think that he would have a career year. Is he trending at a point per game mark? Do you know?
Yeah, so he's at 50 and 51, and he missed 27 games.
How did I know? You
Right?
certainly get that from watching him.
He missed, close to a third of the season. And with that said, Steve, I want to add to what you stated. I know this is small text. I'm sorry. This is from Molly Walker, New York Post. This is what stood out to me about Adam Fox. Okay, this is a player 2 weeks ago that were like his comments suggested maybe he wants to leave, right? Like, and this is through the losing stretch. This is what he said post game after on Sunday. Let's see. I think that shows that we haven't really gave up on the year and packed it in. I know that's a small, very small sample, very passive quote. Um, but he continued, like we said, we're still trying to build on something and gain momentum and establish something here that we can take positively into the summer and build on that. That doesn't suggest to me that Adam Fox wants to leave. That doesn't suggest to me that Adam Fox wants to leave. And I know it's one quote after one really great game. Maybe all the chemicals were firing off in his body and he was feeling happy. But I do think that Adam Fox, 50 and 51, missed 27 games this year, hasn't really been healthy in 3 years or had a full season, like you said. Um, and also, like you said, he would be on pace for a career year. I think his high is 73 points in 23-24. He had 2 or 3 70-point seasons or around there for a 3 year stretch in the Rangers' last successful window, and that with that last group, like with Kreider and Panarin. And I do think that quote suggests Fox wants to stay, at least for the moment. And Steve, how important is that to you that Fox made that statement post game?
Yeah, I think I always think that Adam Fox, of course, you look at his story and everything. I always thought that he wanted to stay here for a Ranger and be a Ranger for a long time. And it's a shame that the last 2 seasons kind of got in the way and clouded that a little bit. You look at everything that's going on, but I think what's going on recently gives you a glimmer of hope. This future and really sets up this retool and not rebuild. And if the Rangers are able to, you know, hypothetically in the next 1 or 2 years turn it around and retool and are able to be competitor and they are able to get into the playoffs, I think they will be one of the teams in the league that have very rarely done a retool in this short amount of time. You very see teams, go from bottom of the standings to retooling and being one of the better teams in the league. It's very hard to do, and I think Adam Fox is going to be a huge part of that solution moving forward if this team is able to do that. And you look at, this sense, it's not just Adam Fox, Mika and Miller, the veterans embracing the kids and helping them bring them along. I think that's what good teams do. I think that's what good organizations and good teammates do. So I think it's very positive. The Rangers are going to be finishing the year on a positive, much more likely on a positive note than the Devils are. And maybe the Islanders, we'll see what happens. We could talk about that in a second. Not that that means anything, but again, it's a full sense of confidence for us fans and the organization as well going into what will be the most pivotal drafts, in most recent memory, for this Rangers. Can't wait to cover that. That's going to be a whole lot of fun. But again, Adam Fox, I think it's so crucial that he's come out and said that. And, I want him to stay. You mentioned, I think it was, man, what was that, 1 or 2 years ago? You questioned Adam Fox's, ability to stay healthy. Whether it was in the off season, whether it was, previewing the season's end after 2024. We talked about how important Adam Fox is going to be, and I think it is good to raise that concern that you brought up right here on this show, that you have to question Adam Fox's ability. Not his ability to play and be a QB1 and all of his talent and what he could do on the ice. You have to question his ability to stay on the ice. And when he's on the ice, I think he's one of the best defensemen in the league. He's top 3 in my book for sure. His question is, can he stay on the ice? And that's a big problem moving forward. You want to talk about his status long-term here in New York. If he's not able to give you a healthy season next year, you sit here and you say, okay, do we want to, lock him up and commit to him long term when he is not going to play 25 to 30% of every season. So that's a tough question. I love Fox, huge part of this team, huge part of the success. But that's something you got to question, right?
I have a question for you.
Sure. Spill.
Okay, Foxy missed 27 games this year, but I've seen this discourse online. Cale Makar only played 60 games in 2022-2023. He finished with 66 points and he finished third in Norris voting. Do
Wow.
you think that Adam Fox should at least finish with Norris votes or a substantial amount of first place Norris votes by the season's end?
Yeah, I think he should finish with some votes. Obviously not going to win it. I don't think he
No,
should with the amount of
no.
time that he missed. I don't think anybody can miss 25 to 30% of the season and finish number one on that. I mean, you'd have to have a historic year. But I think he should garner some looks. Again, when he's on the ice, he's one of the best defensemen in the league. It's not what he brings defensively; it's really offensively. He is like having a fourth, forward on the ice. And that's what he means to this team. He's so important. So yeah, I think he should garner some looks, but yeah, obviously it's not gonna come anywhere near, right? You
Yeah,
asked the
no.
question, so you think he should garner some looks, I'm assuming.
I think I won't say top three. This year has been the last few years of NHL defensemen. It's been a renaissance, right? Like Bouchard. I mean, not on the defensive side of the puck, but his offensive output's been incredible. He's looking like he could hit 100 points this year. Werenski, I think, is up there. Makar is up there. Quinn Hughes is up there. Like, there are so many defensemen now that I think are capable of winning that award and finishing first or in the top three. But I'd like to see Adam Fox land in like the top 5 to 8 territory of Norris voting because I do think, does it come with name? Does it come with flash? Adam Fox is not a flashy uh, attacker. He's a two-way defender that plays with his brain. And, I hope that doesn't take a knock on the voting because if Makar finished third with 66 and 60, I don't see why Fox can't finish at least in the top 8 with 50 and 51, missing 1/3 of the year.
Exactly. I think what might hurt him a little bit is this year is probably a little bit more competitive in that running than it was. And what year was that for McCarr? 22?
22, 23. I
Yeah,
agree with
but
you.
I think this year, again, you mentioned all those names. I think this year is going to be a little more competitive, which will leave Fox for sure on the outside. But it gives you hope for the future. And I think Adam Fox and making those comments, that shows you that, this team has showed him that it can be something. And I think those comments also show us that these are really good signs that our foundation is not completely destroyed. I think you look at it's very hard to come out of the year we had last year and to turn things around fully, even with a new coach. And I think we, just being a fan, got so caught up and that kind of skewed our thought process in the beginning of the year. And ouch, you want to look at something that's going to be tough to look at especially in mine, preseason predictions. Oof. I think I had the
We'll have
Rangers
to pull those up. One of the last episodes, we'll pull those up.
Yeah, I had the Rangers finishing third in the division, finished third in the league. But I think again those comments show us that this foundation is not completely destroyed, and that's something to build on from here. That's very important. But again, the key word is continue to build on from here, and I think there's still moves to be made, and it's going to come down to the draft. It's going to come down to free agency, and it's going to really come into Drury's hands. And we're going to really see, this team and the players have given us something to build off of. What can Drury add to that? And I think that is going to be the hardest and the most crucial question. I think this is a good time to ask you. I have a question for you. I've been meaning to ask you this for like the last 6 episodes now. We're in New York here. It's Yankee time. Baseball's back. I know both of us are excited, especially after a sour Ranger season. But I want to ask you, who do you trust more in New York right now? Do you trust Drury and the Rangers, or do you trust Brian Cashman with the Yankees? I've been meaning to ask you this. It's been slipping in my mind, but I'm curious to see who you say.
I don't trust either, but I also look at things with. I said this maybe last episode or on something else. Like if there's this much water in the glass, I will believe that there is water to drink. Okay. And maybe that's a flaw of mine. But the way I do perceive this is Chris Drury inherited a team created by Glenn Sather and then built upon by JD Gorton administration, right? I do think I don't have trust in what Chris Drury will do, but this is a different landscape. Like this is not Iserman and then Brisbois, right? Like this is now another step beyond that, which is how can he now build a team that has some pieces, um, but also create a new team out of that, right? Like he's got some of the remaining guys from the last core. And as you mentioned, big free agency, big draft. I got something in my eye. I'm sorry, folks. Um, but with that said, with Cashman, it feels like they keep running back the same thing. I just saw this really funny viral video of a fan that was like the Yankees are going to look like the best team ever, and then they're going to go 2-40, and then they're going to climb back, win a playoff round, and then maybe lose the next one or the pennant series. And it's just sad that that's what the fan base for the Yankees thinks now of what was the evil empire. But I will say, as much as Cashman I feel like has hit some landmines. Like you do have to think that although in the last few years things haven't been great, um, you have a guy like Aaron Judge, Stanton playing it the way he has, Rice who stepped up. Like there's players that have stepped up. I feel like this is more like the Rangers are a little more comparable to the Mets right now, where it's like they have Soto, they do have an aging Lindor, but the rest now is really up to the management group to figure out.
Yeah, I agree with you 100% on that note. I think the Mets are definitely a better comparable team. And you still look at, what eh, they've been able to do, and they've struggled to add, the one element that they need is pitching. You look at the Rangers and, what's the one, look at this team, what's the one element that we need moving into the offseason? That's a good question. You can either answer that now or save for the offseason, but that's going to be a tough, question moving forward. And you're looking at the free agency and the draft, where do you address these holes? Right.
Yeah. No, you know what? I mean, off the top, I'll spitball. It's got to be like a top six winger. Um, center depth, but does that come within the organization? Do you draft like if you draft Tynan Lawrence, if you drop in the draft a little bit more and you draft Tynan Lawrence, he's a center. You could play him as your 3C, hopefully at 20 years old in the NHL. I'd hope he'd be that ready. I'm not entirely sure. I'd also like to mention just a quick addition. We will probably have prospect analysts come on before the draft. Like it's not just going to be Steve and I going through film. Like we're going to bring the experts on to talk to us. But I also think if there's a market for Dougie Hamilton, there's a market for Will Borgen. What do you do with Borgen? What do you do with Schneider? Is it defense that might need to add? Because I don't think you could go 82 games next season with rookies playing in the top four. But we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah.
Does Matthew Robertson take a step? Does Drew Fortescue take a step?
Yep.
There's a lot of good, Steve. And actually, I want to build upon what you just asked about those young guys. Questions about the near future, the draft, free agency, July. Somehow we're talking about this now like it's not, 3-4 months away. But you see Laba and Cooley coming within one goal, one assist away from a Gordie Howe hat trick. Um, you had Zibanejad's encouraging body work at 32 years old. He's plus 13 goals from last season. Lafreniere is 5 points away from a career high. Fox 50 and 51. Cooley has been on fire. He started the year with only one goal in the first 9 games. He has been cool runnings. But with all that said, you have top tier prospects like Perot and Fortescue who stepped up literally from college hockey into the NHL, and they really haven't missed a step. Like you and I cannot criticize those two.
Yeah.
Then you have Robertson, Malash, Sikora, Garand, Laba. Those are guys that have been in the organization for a little while and have had to earn everything that's come their way. They're energy guys. They have been guys now that are competing for roster spots. I think next year they're not necessarily locks, but like there's going to be great, healthy competition. Sprinkle in Cartier. He's been awesome. He's been an energy guy. I saw some people comparing him to, Brendan Lemieux, Jesper Fast, even a Carl Hagelin-esque player. That's all healthy for this organization. And I think that's what I take away moving forward is that You do have a top draft pick that you really, really hope is a top 3 draft pick. If not like at least top 5. That's an addition, but it feels more like now that pick is an addition to something that's already being built, which I think is a healthy thing. I think that's a great sign of where things are, at least compared to where we were a few weeks ago.
Yeah. Call me crazy, but I'd rather finish the year because we're not going to make the playoffs, but the Islanders, there's a chance the Devils won't make the playoffs. No
Mhm.
miracle, no miracle. Hughes only gets one miracle, and that already happened. So no miracle for them. And the Islanders are probably not going to make the play. Or well, we don't know yet, but the way they're trending, there's a lot of question marks for them. And they, starting with the game that we went to, you lose to the Blackhawks, that's a game you got to win, and now you bring in a new head coach in the final week. I'd love to get your thoughts on that later, but uh, there's a chance they might not make the playoffs. And you could call me crazy, but I'd rather be finish the year that we are and have the year that we had, than be the Islanders, at one point being 8 points up in a playoff spot to not making the playoffs. I'd rather finish the year on a positive note like we are, plus have a top 5 pick. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, that's a hard one to talk through. I feel like my immediate reaction when you had kind of talked about it to me before was, I do understand at the end of the day, if you don't make the playoffs, aren't you all in the same boat? But the reality is, I think the Devils are like Jack Hughes has been the hottest player in the league since the Olympic break. And that's no question, no doubt. I do feel the Devils are a team that's like really the head coach and a few pieces away from getting themselves back into contention. And it's almost like they should be, right? Like that's what we've expected for years now. And Fitzy, one of the a lot of folks, reporters, people in the organization, people within the hockey world love Fitzgerald, but it felt like a few things sank him in the same way that Darsh is facing complications with the Islanders right now. He made moves, he took the risks, and they didn't work. The Islanders situation, I feel like, is actually a little bit closer to where the Rangers are at because they brought in Shen, aging guy. They still have Lee on the roster. They still have Horvat, who's older on the roster and has had a great season, but veteran guy, 30 years, 33, 32, 33. They brought in Susie, older guy, former Ranger. We know him well. So I think the Islanders are closer because when we went to that game, what I noticed was that Schaefer drives everything. Like Barzal's still there, pending what happens with him in the summer. But for the Islanders, it feels like they're not a coach away from getting themselves back to true contention. It feels like there's still a lot of work to be done. And for the Rangers, it feels like they're in a similar boat. They still have some veteran guys. And if they get a top pick from this draft class, and I know this is a two-step equation, and he performs in the NHL, not to the level that Schaefer has, that's for sure. I don't know if anyone out of the next few drafts will. But isn't that a lot closer to the Islanders situation than the Devils? Like to me, I think the Devils are like a step away from contention. Like they should be contending. The Islanders are still like building towards that. And I think if things go right for the Rangers, we know that doesn't always happen, then maybe they're in a similar position to the Islanders. And in that case, I will agree with you that I'd almost rather not the absolute travesty we saw for the first 60 games, but in the last month, I'm a little more encouraged. The last 2 weeks, I'm more encouraged with this Rangers team more than I was ever, more than I have been the last 2 years.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I want to hear your thoughts now. Let's talk about the Islanders. I know you had a thought pulled up on that. So, what is your thought on everything that's happening around the Islanders? Very surprising that they want to follow in the footsteps of Vegas and make such a drastic change with 3 or 4 games remaining of the season, especially being 1 point out of the playoffs. So, what is your thoughts on that?
Got all right. I'm not going to put a number to him. You know me, but I could fly on this one. The Torts moves seem like very Vegas brand. Like they always make the bombastic move, right? Like when they got Petrangelo, when they brought in Mark Stone, like usually it's with players. Um, but this is an organization that's not afraid to take the risk and does anything to win, literally anything. And They've competed since they've come into the league. They went from the misfits to an elite team that continues to compete, and it's based on those very highly calculated but risky moves. Okay, that's separate from what we see with the Islanders. The Islanders, to me, was definitely a panic button, but I also think now that it's been a few days since we saw the potential of Waugh being fired to now, Patrick Waugh is a great development coach. He can go into his QMJHL and develop players without this intense structure. And he can have those relationships and coach with fire and passion and not be worried about structure. The thing the Islanders need so badly is a really good structure. And I can't believe I'm saying that after we watched the Torts, apologies, the Trotz years of just like, it felt like Barzal was trapped in structure. Like he wasn't
Mhm.
reaching his full potential because of structure. Two, Peter DeBoer was one of two of the best coaches you could get on the market. And although from the human side, it takes a long time for coaches. Dean Evison was just talking on, by the way, great guy, great coach on Morning Cup of Hockey this morning, talking about how it takes time to build relationships. It takes 1 to 2 years to build relationships with players. It's a personality management business. That's what coaching is. It's not always the X's and O's. It's also about how can I press the buttons on this guy? Steve reacts to harsh criticism, but Matt doesn't. He has thinner skin or he's more sensitive. Or how can I get to him? How can I motivate him? How can I get him to do the right things at the right times? Do I scratch him? Do I bench him? Do I give him a little bit more time? Do I bump him up in the lineup? It's all those asset management things, but a coach is coaching the players he has. Peter DeBoer has gone to 3 different destinations and brought them to conference finals. Bruce Cassidy's up there too. Two very different coaches, but two guys that have that great experience. I think for the Islanders, the firing of Watt and the hiring of DeBoer is actually the best move they probably could have done. The unfortunate thing is that it comes at this time. It might be the wrong time. Like I think DeBoer is a coach that gets you from playoff, perennial playoff appearances to like a conference final, to a championship, to a cup final. I don't think that's where the Islanders are necessarily at right now. And I think DeBoer is a coach that might have been ready for this team when it was a little bit more ready for contention. So, with that said, I know I just threw like all these shades of paint at the wall, Steve-O. That's my thoughts on that. But what are your thoughts on DeBoer coming into the Islanders' room, literally 4 games out from the playoffs, which they look like they could make or they definitely could not make?
Yeah, I you set the table up very nicely there for me. I do agree with you. I think this is probably the best move they can make. I question the timing of it. I don't know if this is, the time. And by going with him, I think you're committing to him longer term. I think the Islanders certainly wanted to reset the narrative. They want to shift their focus more towards, a new voice, a new system, and a new era. But it makes me question going back to the trade deadline. This is an Islanders team that, let's not forget, they sent a first round pick. They also sent a third rounder, a prospect, to get Braden Shen, and I think that's not a move that you make that makes you unsure of your coach, and I think that was a move more made in belief, but I think in the team, in the moment, the leadership behind the bench at that time. But you look at the Islanders and they've stumbled, they've fallen from grace and they've stumbled they've stumbled bad as of late. They're losing 4 or 5 straight. They flipped outside the playoff bubble, and I think the equation changed. And I think this was kind of a no lose scenario. Whereas if the Islanders exceeded expectations, then they share the credit, and if they fall short, then they had their, built-in pivot point. I think they decided they knew where they wanted to go, and they said, you know what, let's get to it now. Let's start building for future seasons, even if things don't pan out. And I think everyone was looking at it originally from, that kind of one-sided thing of this year, this playoff. But I think it exactly played out how they wanted to, and you're going to see DeBoer here past one season for sure. And this is kind of the system and the route that they want to go in. But it's going to be interesting for sure. I think I agree with you. Vegas, you can't compare Vegas and the Islanders. There are two different points, two different teams, two different situations, completely different. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out. The Islanders, they got to play the Leafs, they got to play the Canadians, and they got to play the Senators. And I think what helps them out is they're playing all the remaining games of the season at home. I think that is pretty big, especially bringing in a new coach. It's gonna be fun to watch. Do you think? I know we're not prediction guys here, but do you think they could pull this off and make the playoffs? What do you think?
There's always the coach's bump. Like you have a new coach and maybe that fires the team up, right? Like Raw had to like repair his relationship with Anthony Duclair with the comments he made at the end of last season. Um, I think that they could get the coach's bump and like win 3 straight and get in. But to be quite frank, I know this is a little bit of hypocrisy from my logic, but they have 3 wins in their last 10. New coach comes in. They don't play till tomorrow. The Flyers won a very convincing overtime game against the Bruins on Easter. Like the other teams that are competing with them have really made the push. I think the Flyers are probably the team they're competing the most against. And obviously, from what we saw in the standings and the wild card situation, it's the Bruins locking up pretty much that one spot. So you're really fighting for that second spot. Detroit's 2 points back, and they haven't played great. I really think it's going to come down to the wire. And I actually think the Islanders have a little bit more of a chance than I did on Sunday, just based on how the rest of the games have kind of worked out. But they do not have the games remaining that the other teams do. Every other team they're competing against still has one game up on them and one more opportunity. So that doesn't really play in their favor, but I think the Islanders could make it. Like it's still very much in the air in my book. What about you, Steve?
I agree with you. I think they very much could still make it. Do you still have the standings to pull up? If you should,
Yeah, I got him.
if you do, let's pull that back up. I think they could. But I don't know if they will. Yeah, I think they're on such a bad losing streak, and I think that it's very hard to ask of a new coach to come in, and put him in a tough position for this year. I still think, just like the Rangers and the ending this year is stuff to build off of. I still think if the Boer's your guy, I think there's a lot of positives to take away by getting him out here in this situation. But you look at it, it's tough. The Islanders have played one more game than Ottawa. Ottawa has one more game in hand, plus a game against the Islanders. I think you got to figure whoever wins that game, Ottawa at the Islanders will have the leg advantage in the playoffs. Detroit, I'm not a Detroit guy. I think Geyser plan is long past expired. Kind of crazy hearing me say that, especially you go back 4 years, but that is pretty much over. Columbus
Yes,
is a team.
you ride hardcore on Detroit, man. Steve-O's been the Detroit guy for years. So the fact he's saying that's,
Yeah, but rightfully so,
substantial.
right? Do you agree with me?
Oh, 100%,
Like, how could
100%.
you not?
Except I think of the teams remaining with the Islanders that are fighting for that spot, Detroit probably has arguably the best team, although that Patrick Kane penalty was really bad against Minnesota. I'd argue in terms of like talent, like Detroit's up there. Like to me, they do have an experienced goaltender, and like Columbus to me might be out just because of the way they've played the last few games.
Well, I would say the same thing about the Washington as well. I think that's
Yeah, the
showing against
Caps.
the Rangers when you get spanked that bad. I just don't know how you come back from that. Falling, you're falling out of a playoff position, and then you don't have that one game that the Blue Jackets and the Red Wings have in hand. It's tough. Here's a team that we really haven't talked about all this year. I'm curious to see if you have any thoughts on them. How about Philly sitting comfortable third in the division? Are they a team? They were a team that we've talked about heavily, especially coming into this year in the last few seasons. Are they a team that could get over that hunch? Pittsburgh is a team that's totally surprised us. But if you ask me honestly, I think Pittsburgh is on a whole nother level than Philly is. You have any thoughts on them? Are they a team that is to be taken seriously come playoffs?
Well, I think every team should be taken seriously come playoffs, but I also think that when you get beyond that line, like what are their chances? I think the fact that they have found their way um into the playoffs this year is a win for the organization because there were times this year where it felt like their rebuild plan was falling apart, right? Like it started in the preseason with the Mitchkoff commentary and how Tocchet handled that publicly. I think it felt like what the Rangers season was like at the start of the year, where you said, wow, this is going south and fast. And they found a way. Um, to me, you get Porter Martone, a player that you told to play college hockey basically to get ready. He succeeds in his season with MSU. He gets more time in the gym, more practice time. And then he comes into the NHL, and the coaching staff says, we're putting him into overtime. And then he scores the winning goal. Like, that's a situation that I don't see the Islanders or Red Wings pulling off down the stretch here. And I think that's been the difference is like managing players on the ice, coaching decisions, and kind of where the team has brought themselves. Like Bump is playing a lot better for the Flyers. Their veterans are playing better, and their goaltending situation has at least been chill for now. For now. But I mean, do I see the Flyers making a run now? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree with you on that point. But I want to talk about what's directly comparable to Rangers. I think what's interesting about the Flyers, I think, is their trade deadline positioning. And yeah, you got to give them credit because they ignored Precious the Tank, especially for a better draft pick, because their postseason odds were not good coming into the trade deadline. And instead of sending assets away, and they stayed course. They played meaningful games for a month. They were able to compete, and they were able to get to third in a division. So I think that was such a hard mountain to conquer for them. But you look at what the Penguins were able to do, at the end of last year, coming to this year, and you say, what, with this foundation, this team, in terms of the Rangers, why can't we do that? So I think that is definitely comparable to the Rangers, and again, it adds to the hope and the credibility of what this team could be moving forward. But again, such crucial decisions coming with the roster. And Jury's gonna have his hands full, whether it's the draft, whether it's free agency. These are going to be, big questions. There were two main questions coming in. It was, up to the players to show that this core still has something to play for. And they've shown that in the last month. And now it's going to come up to Jury to see what he adds. Because again, there are still holes and on this team, and this team still has a lot of work to do. So again, that's my comparison there. Any other thoughts on the playoff conversation? Anything that we haven't got to talk about?
Yeah, the reason these teams are in the playoffs is what Steve Alcat always says. Just echoing off the cave walls here from MSG Studios is you have to go on a run at some point in the season. And I think what's disappointing this year with the Rangers, which we beat this horse, I mean, beyond death here on this podcast, was the Rangers never went on a run. And if they had at any point in the year, if they went beyond a 3-game win streak at any point in the year, before March, they're probably at least in the conversation. Now, again, we just talked about our opinions on would you rather miss the playoffs by 1 or 2 games or be in that position? I think anyone says yes. But is it more painful than what we've endured, at least for the first 50 to 60 games of the year? So, with that, I think if the Rangers go on a run and put themselves in a position to succeed, you would have been happy. Although I do think it feels a little bit better to now look and say it's time to rebuild. It was time for this group to do that, for this club to do that, and get a better draft choice. I'm happy with that. Now that we are here, 2020 hindsight, I'm more happy with that than getting the 15th overall pick and missing the playoffs by 1 game. But with that said, these teams like the Flyers, if the Flyers didn't go on runs during the year, they wouldn't be in this position. If the Islanders didn't go on a run at some point this year, they wouldn't be in this position. It's sad to think that this year's playoff teams with 80 points on the cusp of 90 can make the playoffs. And if the Rangers just went on a run at any point, they probably could have. Now, I still think it's different because the Flyers as an organization are in a different standing. the Islanders have this generational talent out of last year's draft on the roster, different position. The Devils should be in that position. Like, I genuinely think the Devils should be in a position to be contending, and they haven't. The Rangers are not any of those teams. Their situation is unique. They're trying to retool, rebuild, keep some assets, build with new ones. And I think it only plays better into their favor that they're going to get a top draft choice, whether it's from the 1 spot to potentially the 8 spot. But with that said, I just wanted to add that as my, kind of a final thought here to wrap our episode here with only 4 games remaining with the for the rest of the season for our Rangers.
That's a great thought you had there. You think about if we had this run in the middle of the season, we're still in the playoff conversation. You look at when the Flyers went on their run; they went on it 2 months earlier than we had. And you look at if we go 6 and 7, in December. Yes, there you go. How to put that in there. This is a completely different conversation. We are in the gist. We would be where the Blue Jackets are and the Washington Capitals are. That's a great point. It comes down to timing, and when it mattered most in December and November, we couldn't compile 2 wins in a row, let alone let's not forget those games. Where our biggest conversation here on Puck Talk was, can we win 2 games in a row? And for the longest time, 2 months, we could not. And we couldn't even score a goal at one point. That's how bad things were. And I'm happy that we were able to turn things around. And you look at the matter of things and you say, this team right now, as of April 7th, going back to November 28th, those are 2 completely different teams. Pieces were, you look at the pieces we have up now and the young kids that we have, they were 2 completely different teams, and that's what gives me hope that team in November was not able to get things done. But now here in April, this team is we hope that the concoction of the veteran players that we have and these young kids, can actually develop and be something, I think that's the hope, that we want to sit here and end the episode on and say that there is hope, but there are big things coming in the off season. And no matter what happens, the draft, free agency, we'll be here at Puck Talk CS to break everything down. That's all we have for you today. Always remember, it's just the luck of the puck.